I always thought silence was the cruelest part of family dinners, the kind that sits heavy between polished glasses and forced smiles. But I was wrong. The worst came when my father grabbed the back of my head and shoved it straight into my dinner plate. Mashed potatoes stung my skin, gravy soaked my hair, and laughter exploded like fireworks around me. Not one hand reached out, not my mother, sipping wine, not my sister smirking at her throne beside him. Cameras flashed everywhere, hungry for proof that I was nothing but a joke. That night I learned truth has teeth. The hall glowed with the kind of golden light that made everything look perfect on the surface. Long white tablecloths ran the length of the banquet tables, heavy with crystal glasses and silver cutlery, polished until they looked like jewellery. Every seat was filled with a relative I hadn't seen in months, some in years, and yet they smiled as if this was a reunion of deep affection rather than a performance. At the centre of it all stood my father, Victor Hale, commanding the room as though Riverbridge Hall had been built solely for him. His voice rose above the clinking of glasses, each story rehearsed, each laugh timed. He didn't need a microphone. His wine glass, lifted high, became one. I sat a few places down, not at the end, but close enough to feel invisible. My sister Sloane occupied the spot of honour at his right hand, shining in her tailored dress, her smile wide enough to catch the light of every camera pointed in her direction. My mother, Elaine, sat beside her, lips painted red, smile frozen into place. She looked elegant, dignified and untouchable, but when she leaned towards me earlier that evening, her words were sharp as knives. Smile, don't embarrass us. The command rang in my ears now as I forced a curve onto my lips, though it felt more like a mask than an expression. Dinner flowed with the kind of predictability that came from years of repetition. Victor launched into one of his stories about closing a deal in New York, about impressing a client who couldn't believe his luck to work with me. The relatives leaned in, nodding, laughing on cue. Someone snapped photos of him, mid-gesture, arm cutting the air like he was delivering a sermon. Every time I tried to answer a polite question from across the table. "How's work, Claire? How's your apartment?" His voice thundered over mine, drowning me out with another anecdote. Laughter followed, applause even, and I found myself shrinking smaller, folding into the corners of my chair. The plates arrived, carried by servers dressed in black, setting down roast beef glistening under the lights, potatoes steaming, salads destined to wilt untouched. I helped pass the bread, arranging rolls neatly into the basket, careful not to spill, careful not to draw attention. This was the choreography I had learned. Blend in, stay quiet, do not disrupt the performance. But the silence around me began to grow heavier than the chatter across the table. Halfway through the meal, a pause came, rare, unplanned. My uncle, seated across from me, tilted his head and smiled, curiosity slipping past the rehearsed veneer. "Claire," he said lightly, "you're awfully quiet tonight." For a heartbeat, the table actually looked at me. I lifted my head, fork poised in mid-air, lips parting to form a reply. I thought maybe I'd speak, maybe I'd exist. But before I could shape a single word, Victor's laugh cracked through the air. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming with a cruel sort of delight. "She's always been better seen than heard," he announced, voice carrying down the length of the table. A ripple of laughter broke out, uneven, some hesitant, some indulgent. My cheeks burned, but I tried to steady my breath. Victor wasn't finished. He never was. He set down his glass with a theatrical flourish, and the room hushed as they were waiting his next performance. "You know what?" he said, grinning wider. "Let's make her useful." The words didn't register until his hand was on me. Fingers like iron clamped to the back of my head, sudden and unyielding. Before I could react, before anyone could stop him, not that anyone would, he shoved. My face hit the plate with a force that rattled my teeth. Heat and salt burst against my skin as mashed potatoes smeared across my cheek, gravy seeping into my hair. Gasps erupted around the table, but they were quickly drowned by laughter that crashed like a wave, rolling over me until I couldn't breathe. I pulled back slowly, trembling, bits of food clinging to me like a costume I hadn't chosen. My father leaned back in his chair, beaming as though he'd just delivered the line of the night. "There," he declared, pointing at me with satisfaction. "Now she matches the table." More laughter followed, cameras flashed, and I froze in place, every muscle locked. My mother sipped her wine. My sister smirked. Not a single hand reached out to me, and in that moment I understood. I wasn't a daughter at this table. I was the punchline. The bathroom was colder than the hall, its tiles reflecting harsh white light that spared no cruelty. I locked the door behind me and gripped the sink, staring into the mirror as if it might offer a version of myself I could stand to see. But there was no mercy in the glass. My face was streaked with mashed potatoes, gravy clinging like a parody of makeup, and bits of parsley tangled in my hair. Mascara bled down my cheeks, black rivers cutting through pale skin. I looked like a ghost that had been dragged through dinner and left for display. My chest ached, the pressure rising like it wanted to tear me open, but no tears came. I thought they would. I thought the humiliation would finally break the dam. But instead there was only stillness, a hollow, ringing silence inside me. My heart had splintered so many times before that maybe it no longer knew how to shatter. I leaned closer, searching my own eyes for some trace of the girl who used to dream of family, meaning safety, comfort, love. All I saw was someone staged as the evening's entertainment. My father's punchline, my mother's silence, my sister's smirk. It was a grotesque kind of role, but in that bathroom I realised something important. A role could be rewritten. From outside the door, muffled laughter drifted in, mixed with the chime of cutlery and the pop of camera shutters. It hit me suddenly. Those flashes, those glowing screens, phones, cameras, they had been everywhere, angled towards the table, hungry for every detail. They had captured his cruelty in full view. The evidence wasn't in my memory alone. It lived in their hands, their devices. The same people who had laughed might also be the ones who recorded the very proof that could cut through my father's mask. The thought jolted through me like a spark. For years he had relied on the loyalty of silence, on everyone swallowing discomfort for the sake of appearances. But technology didn't keep secrets. A phone loved the truth, even when its owner didn't. I rinsed my face, dabbed at the worst of the mess with paper towels, though the stains clung stubbornly. My reflections still carried the remnants of his joke, but now my eyes looked sharper, alive with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. I smoothed my dress, squared my shoulders, and unlocked the door. When I stepped back into the hall, the room seemed louder than before. Glasses clinked, laughter rang, forks scraped plates. The performance carried on, uninterrupted by my absence, and that was exactly what I needed. No one cared enough to notice me slip into the background, which meant I was free to observe without suspicion. I returned to my seat with the grace of a shadow. My father's booming laugh filled the room again, his hands slicing the air as if conducting an orchestra of adoration. My mother nodded along, her wine glass poised like a prop. My sister leaned into a cousin's phone for another photo, her smirk rehearsed. I let my gaze drift, careful, patient. There, Aunt Sherry with her phone half hidden in her lap, scrolling through what looked suspiciously like a video. Across the table, Cousin Ashley tilted her screen towards her husband, both snickering quietly before hiding it again. Further down, Eli, 14, restless, fingers tapping his phone, with the fever of someone who lived through the lens more than the moment. His wide grin betrayed that he had seen something worth keeping. The weight in my chest shifted, replaced by a strange calm. They thought I was invisible, but invisibility had its power. I was no longer the quiet one ignored by the table. I was the watcher, and I saw exactly where my leverage lived. I waited for a lull, then leaned toward Eli, voice soft, casual. "Hey," I said, masking steel beneath sweetness. "Mind sending me that clip from earlier? For memories, you know." He grinned, eager for validation. "The mashed potato thing? That was hilarious." My jaw tightened, but I kept my tone light. "Yeah, that one. Send it before you forget." A few taps later, my phone buzzed in my lap. The message sat there, unopened but glowing with promise. Proof captured in pixels undeniable. The first shard of power I had taken back from him in years. I smiled, not the brittle mask I'd worn all evening, but something sharper, steadier. For the first time that night, the laughter around me didn't feel like it was crushing me. Because I knew the joke wasn't finished. It was only beginning. The next morning, I woke with the sour smell of gravy still haunting my hair, though I had washed it twice. The memory clung just as stubbornly. My phone sat on the nightstand, the clip from Eli untouched, waiting like a loaded weapon. For hours I stared at it, afraid to press play, afraid of watching myself become the family's entertainment all over again. But power isn't in pretending something didn't happen. It's in looking it in the eye. I finally opened the file. The video sprang to life, shaky, poorly lit, but damning. There was my father's hand pressing the back of my head. There was the smear of potatoes. There was the roar of laughter. I flinched at the sound, louder than I remembered. Eli's camera had caught not just the act, but the chorus of approval surrounding it. The cruelty wasn't my imagination. It was documented, undeniable. 2 days passed, and I began collecting more. Aunt Sherry, ever eager to share, forwarded me a clip she thought was funny in a twisted way. Her voice in the background gasped before she laughed, the audio capturing her complicity. Cousin Ashley, after some coaxing, admitted she had the clearest view. She sent me her video in a quick transfer, no hesitation, as though it meant nothing. To them it was gossip, a party trick to replay. To me it was a record of betrayal. Each angle revealed something new. Sherry's captured the shockwave through the room, the way heads turned, the flash of expressions, a few uncomfortable grimaces swallowed by forced smiles. Ashley's clip caught my father's smirk in crisp detail, the satisfaction radiating from him like stage lights. Eli's version, close to the action, held every word sharp, make yourself useful as decoration. Together, the clips painted the truth from every perspective. But then came the twist I hadn't anticipated. Scrolling through Ashley's video, I realised the phone had picked up more than the visuals. The audio caught layers of sound, overlapping laughter, snippets of muttered comments. Someone said, "That's not right," quickly drowned out. Another whispered, "She's too sensitive," followed by snickering. The cruelty wasn't just in my father's shove. It lived in the soundtrack of my family's approval. I replayed it over and over, each time my stomach twisting tighter. It wasn't one person's act, it was a collective choice, a chorus of mockery, proof that I wasn't just ignored, I was sacrificed for their amusement. As the files accumulated, so did the memories. Watching those clips pulled me backward into years I had tried to bury. I was 16 at a cousin's wedding, dressed in a silk dress my mother had insisted was flattering. I had spent hours on my hair, makeup carefully done, feeling, for once, like I belonged in the picture. Then Victor shoved me, laughing, into the pool in front of the guests. My mascara ran, my dress clung, and the photos taken that night lived longer than my dignity. Everyone said it was a joke. I laughed along because what else could I do? I was 22 when a neighbour asked about my job, a modest position at a bookstore I loved. My father had waved a hand, chuckling. "She plays with paperbacks, nothing serious." The neighbour laughed and I shrank. At home I cried quietly, but by the next dinner the story had become part of his routine. The one about Claire, the bookworm who thought she had a career. These weren't isolated events. They were rehearsals for the moment at Riverbridge Hall. Sitting on my bed with 3 videos open on my laptop, I felt the weight of years pressing down. My whole life I had been the expendable character in their performance, the punchline, the scapegoat, the disposable daughter, and yet the recordings offered me something new. For the first time, it wasn't just my word against his. It wasn't just memory, slippery and dismissible. It was proof captured from 3 angles in their voices, their laughter. The clips burned, but they also illuminated. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't oversensitive. I had been humiliated systematically, repeatedly, and now I held the evidence in my hands. The question was no longer if they had done it. The question was what I would do with the truth. The living room became my editing suite. I closed the blinds, set my laptop on the coffee table, and poured all 3 clips into the software. My fingers trembled on the keyboard as if I were handling explosives. And in a way, I was. I lined the files side by side, each perspective offering a different angle of the same wound. I decided on the opening shot quickly. Victor, glass raised high, proclaiming in his booming voice about family values and the importance of respect. The audio was crisp, his words carried the false authority of a preacher. Then I cut sharply, his hand slamming down on my head, my face vanishing into food. Laughter followed like a soundtrack he had orchestrated. The contrast was brutal, surgical. From there I wove the clips together, letting each one speak louder than any accusation I could make. Sherry's angle showed the gasps, the uneasy smiles swallowed into complicity. Ashley's displayed his smirk with merciless clarity. Eli's provided the cruelest line in perfect audio. Make yourself useful as decoration. I repeated it once in slow motion, overlaying the echo until the words filled the silence between frames. Every cut, every transition, felt like stitching a wound closed and opening another. For years he had performed, and I had been his prop. Now I was rewriting the stage directions. Hours slipped by. At some point, I stood to stretch and knocked a box from the shelf above the desk. It fell open, spilling papers across the floor. Old tax forms, brittle photographs, hospital receipts yellowed with age. Annoyed, I crouched to gather them, intending to shove the mess back inside. But one envelope, tucked deep in the pile, caught my eye. My name written in my mother's looping script. Curiosity overrode caution. I slid the contents free, a birth certificate, but not the one I'd seen before. The father's name was blank. Tucked behind it was a letter, creased and fragile, addressed to Elaine. I sat on the floor, my breath trapped in my throat as I read. The letter was short, only a few lines, but it was enough to tilt my world. Victor was not my biological father. My mother had met him after I was born, and though he had agreed to take me in, it was never with affection. The words were clinical, almost contractual. She will be raised as part of the household. Appearances matter. The edges of the paper cut into my fingers as I clutched it. Suddenly, so much made sense. The constant comparisons to Sloane, the endless ridicule, the way he looked at me as if I were an intruder in his story. I had always been an outsider, but now I had proof that I was never truly part of the family he built for display. For a long time I sat among the papers, the glow of the unfinished montage flickering across the room. The discovery twisted the knife deeper, but it also clarified something. The video I was creating wasn't just revenge. It wasn't just about humiliating him the way he humiliated me. It was about reclaiming myself, tearing away the false narrative he had written for me as the unwanted daughter. I wiped my face, returned to the laptop and finished the edit with new determination. I placed Victor's sermon about respect at the beginning, his words promising integrity, and then intercut every act of cruelty I could find. Each laugh, each shove, each smirk layered against the glossy images of family cards and holiday portraits. The hypocrisy screamed louder with every frame. Finally, I ended with a freeze frame of my gravy-streaked face, paired with stark white text, a father's joke, a family's laughter, a daughter's humiliation, then fade to black. When the render finished, I saved the file to a drive and slipped it into my bag. The weight of it felt heavier than metal. I sat back, staring at the envelope on the floor. Victor might never have been my father by blood, but he had shaped my life with his cruelty. The montage wasn't just a weapon against him. It was a declaration. I was done being his prop. This was no longer about revenge. It was about identity, about pulling myself out of the role he had written for me and naming myself for the first time. The announcement came 2 days later, over brunch at my parents' house. Victor raised his coffee cup like it was another champagne toast and declared, "We'll be hosting a slideshow next week, a proper celebration, a night to remember." The words made my stomach turn, because I already knew how much he loved that phrase. His legacy was built on carefully staged nights. This one was no different. He wanted to gather the extended family again, invite close friends, even bring in Martin Keane, a wealthy business contact whose approval could open doors Victor had been chasing for years. This slideshow wasn't just about nostalgia. It was about power, reputation, money. Elaine clasped her hands together as if the idea had fallen from heaven itself. "That will be wonderful, darling," she said, her smile as practiced as her posture. Sloane squealed, already imagining herself framed in photo after photo, the star of the family brand. I stirred my coffee slowly, masking my reaction. Inside, adrenaline surged like fire, but outside I played my part. The quiet daughter, agreeable, docile, overlooked. Over the following days, the house transformed into a theatre of preparation. Caterers came and went, florists measured the hall, rental staff checked the sound system. Victor strode through it all like a general inspecting his troops, barking orders, correcting details, rehearsing his charm for the spotlight. I slipped into the background, doing exactly what was expected of me. I helped Sloane pick out dresses, nodding at each option until she landed on a glittering silver gown she declared worthy of the slideshow. I zipped her into it, held the mirror, even smiled when she twirled, though inside every compliment tasted like ashes. With my mother, I offered to review catering lists, pretended to care about whether the hors d'oeuvres were salmon or shrimp. She seemed almost relieved, as if my cooperation proved I had finally given up my rebellious streak. "I knew you'd come around," she whispered one evening, as we sorted table placements. Her voice carried a strange mixture of triumph and pity, as though my silence was her victory, and perhaps that was the greatest illusion of all. Because while they rehearsed their roles, I rehearsed mine too. At night in my apartment, I replayed the finished montage over and over, testing the timing, adjusting the cuts by seconds to maximise the impact. I memorised the file name, double-checked the formatting so it would run seamlessly on their projector. The USB drive lived in my bag, nestled beside my phone, as close as a weapon tucked in a holster. Every morning I returned to the preparations with a serene face. Victor smiled at me for the first time in months, clapping me on the shoulder as if I were finally stepping into his vision of family unity. "Good to see you in the spirit, Claire," he said, his tone almost fatherly. The hypocrisy nearly made me laugh out loud. Sloane, drunk on attention, draped herself over his arm and whispered, "She's finally learned her place." They both chuckled, and I smiled too, though for entirely different reasons. The twist was simple but effective. They believed I had surrendered. To them, I was the daughter who had accepted her role as the quiet shadow, grateful just to be included. They didn't see the storm brewing behind my stillness. They couldn't imagine that every errand I ran, every polite nod I gave, was camouflage for the betrayal I planned. By the time the invitations were sent and the programme finalised, the stage was set not for Victor's glory, but for his unmasking. He thought he was crafting a night to cement his legacy with Martin Keane at the table, to elevate Sloane as the family's golden jewel, to remind everyone that Victor Hale commanded respect. What he didn't realise was that I had already rewritten the script, and when the lights dimmed, on that night to remember, the performance would no longer belong to him. The evening arrived like a storm wrapped in velvet. Riverbridge Hall glittered with chandeliers, their light bouncing off champagne flutes and sequined dresses. Guests streamed in, coats handed off at the door, voices bright with expectation. Victor thrived in the current, shaking hands, laughing loudly, slapping backs as though he were already delivering the performance of his life. I kept to the edges, my dress plain compared to Sloane's metallic shimmer. She floated beside Victor, basking in the glow of his approval, snapping selfies with relatives, each pose a carefully curated reminder that she belonged at the centre. Elaine glided through the crowd, wineglass in hand, her smile stretched so tight it looked painful. The projector sat at the far end of the room, a rented machine perched on a tall stand, cables snaking into the wall. A laptop rested beside it, already loaded with Victor's slideshow, photos of family vacations, posed dinners and staged laughter. The title screen glowed on standby, A Night to Remember. My pulse quickened, my moment was near. I waited, hovering at the edge of the buffet, sipping water I barely tasted. Every second was torture, the throb of anticipation pounding in my ears. Victor was still making the rounds, clinking glasses with Martin Keane, spinning a story about his latest deal. Martin smiled politely, but his eyes flicked often towards his phone. I knew Victor was desperate to hold his attention. Finally, the opportunity cracked open. Sloane pulled Victor towards the centre of the room for photos, a circle of relatives crowding around them. Elaine fluttered at his side, pulling in admirers. Every eye turned towards the spectacle, just as he intended. I slipped away. The projector table stood momentarily unguarded, humming faintly. I moved quickly, sliding the USB drive from my clutch with fingers that threatened to betray my calm. My heart pounded so violently, I feared the sound alone would draw attention. I crouched, plugging the drive into the laptop. The screen flickered as the system detected the device. My hands flew across the trackpad, finding the slideshow file, replacing it with my own montage. The seconds stretched, each one a lifetime. I heard laughter behind me, the swell of voices, clinking glasses. They had no idea. Just as I finished renaming the file to match Victor's original, a shadow fell across the table. "Excuse me, miss," a voice said. I froze. A staff member stood there carrying a tray of empty glasses, his brow furrowed. "Are you with the event team?" My throat tightened. For a second the world tilted, panic clawing up my spine. If he asked more questions, if he called Victor over, everything would collapse before it began. I forced a smile, gesturing towards the laptop. The slideshow wasn't loading right. Victor asked me to check it. He wants it perfect for Mr. Keane. The man hesitated, glancing at the busy crowd. Then he nodded, perhaps convinced by my calm tone, perhaps just unwilling to involve himself in Victor's theatrics. "All right, just don't touch the cables. They're delicate." He walked away. My knees nearly buckled with relief. Twist avoided, barely. I ejected the USB, tucked it back into my clutch, and straightened just as Victor's booming voice called for everyone to gather. The projector screen brightened, the standby title glowing like a stage curtain ready to part. I moved quickly across the room, slipping into a chair near the back. From here I could see everything: the massive screen, the rows of guests, and most importantly, my parents in the front row. Victor adjusted his tie, beaming, his arm draped proudly around Sloane. Elaine leaned in close, whispering something that made them both laugh. I folded my hands in my lap to steady them, though the tremor inside me was uncontrollable. The montage was loaded, the trap set. Soon the performance would begin, but for once it would not belong to him. It would belong to me. The lights dimmed, and conversation in the hall softened into a hush. The projector flickered, then steadied, filling the wall with the title screen, "A Night to Remember." Guests leaned forward, glasses paused mid-air. Victor clasped his hands together, his smile wide enough to gleam in the glow. The slideshow began innocently enough. Polished family photos filled the screen. Christmas cards with matching sweaters, vacations with blue skies, Sloane in her prom gown, framed by adoring parents. The room hummed with approving murmurs. Elaine tilted her head against Victor's shoulder, basking in the illusion. Then, with a sharp cut, the tone shifted. On screen, Victor raised a glass, his voice booming through the speakers. "Family is built on respect." His words echoed over the room, solemn, weighty. A few heads nodded reflexively, agreeing before they realised what came next. The image froze, and then, with brutal precision, the video cut to another scene. His hand clamping the back of my head, shoving me face first into my plate. The sound of laughter roared, captured from multiple angles, crisp and undeniable. My gravy-streaked face lifted into view, framed in high definition. The room gasped as one. Chairs creaked as people shifted, whispering furiously. The air thickened with shock, embarrassment, discomfort. Somewhere a woman muttered, "Is this real?" Another voice hissed, "Oh my God." For once, Victor didn't control the narrative. His laugh wasn't a cue, but a crime, echoing through the hall like a confession. In the front row, Victor stiffened, his smile faltering. He leaned forward as if moving closer to the screen might change what it showed. Elaine's hand froze on her wine glass, liquid trembling inside the crystal. My pulse hammered, but I sat still, absorbing every flicker of the crowd's reaction. I had wanted them to see, truly see, and now they could not look away. But then I noticed movement at the corner of my vision. Sloane, seated elegantly at Victor's side, clutched her phone, angled low but unmistakably recording. Her eyes widened, mouth open in mock horror, as if she were the innocent bystander shocked by the revelation. Yet the little curl at the edge of her lips betrayed her. Twist within the twist. She wasn't horrified at all. She was savouring it. I realised with a jolt, she wasn't recording the screen to defend him. She was recording the crowd. Every gasp, every whispered judgment, every face caught mid-shock. She was harvesting the fallout like it was her personal drama to broadcast. The room around us quivered on the edge of panic. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some covering their mouths, others looking towards Victor for explanation. But the footage continued, relentless. The screen replayed the shove in slow motion, every cruel detail exaggerated. Victor's grip, the jolt of my neck, the eruption of laughter. The audio looped. Make yourself useful as decoration. Each repetition a hammer blow. The once proud line was now a brand burned into the air. Victor finally stood, half shouting, "That's enough!" But his voice was swallowed by the audio still rolling, his protest drowned out by his own recorded cruelty. I watched Sloane tilt her phone for a better angle, lips parted in a perfect performance of disbelief. But behind the mask she glowed with triumph. To her this wasn't tragedy, it was currency, fodder for her online stage, a chance to turn the family implosion into content. The irony almost made me laugh. For years she had lived in the golden light of his approval. Now she was ready to feed off his downfall, to claim the spotlight even as it burned him. Around us the whispers grew louder. "I had no idea," someone murmured. "How could he?" The veneer of respect was cracking, splintering. Guests no longer looked at Victor as a man to admire, but as a fraud revealed. And still the video rolled. The montage didn't stop at the dinner table. The screen shifted, dissolving into a glossy holiday card from 3 years ago. Victor in a tailored suit, Elaine poised beside him, Sloane sparkling between them. The caption in bold cursive, "From our perfect family to yours." Then the video cut abruptly to a grainy clip from a wedding. I was 16, standing at the edge of a pool in a silk dress, my hair carefully curled. Victor's hand shoved me from behind, and the crowd burst into laughter as I flailed into the water. Mascara streaked down my face, the dress clung, and the camera lingered long enough to capture his grin. Gasps rippled through the room. Some guests looked away, ashamed to have been part of the audience before, to have clapped for him then. Others shifted uncomfortably, realising that this pattern stretched back years. The montage flowed mercilessly. Next came a 4th of July barbecue. A neighbour asked about my new job at a bookstore, pride colouring my timid reply. Victor laughed, loud and derisive. "She plays with paperbacks, nothing serious." The crowd joined in, the camera shaking with mirth. On screen, my forced smile collapsed into silence. Then another glossy holiday photo, smiling faces, matching outfits, contrasted with yet another humiliation. Another moment where I was the butt of his joke. Each pairing sharpened the truth. Behind every polished portrait was a cruelty, carefully hidden but never erased. The guests grew restless. The sound of murmuring rose like a tide. And then it happened. Martin Keane stood. His chair scraped loudly across the floor, a jagged sound that cut through the whispers. All eyes followed him as he smoothed his jacket, expression tight with controlled disgust. "I think I've seen enough," he said, his voice low but firm, carrying across the stunned hall. He didn't look at Victor again. He simply walked towards the exit, his wife trailing behind him. Victor lurched forward, arm outstretched as if he could catch his fortune mid-air. "Martin, wait, this is taken out of context." But Martin didn't even glance back. The door shut behind him, with a finality that reverberated louder than any slam. Victor's face crumpled, the mask slipping. He stood frozen, fists trembling at his sides, as the video played on. The screen faded into the last clip. Not from years ago, not from someone else's phone, from mine. The camera pointed at a bathroom mirror, my reflection staring back. My face was smeared with gravy, my hair sticky with food, eyes red but dry. I looked straight into the lens, my voice flat, steady, deliberate. "This is what respect looks like in our family." The image held, then faded into black. White text appeared across the void. "A night to remember, for the right reasons." And then nothing. The lights came back on with a snap that felt brutal after the darkness. The hall was silent, so silent the hum of the projector sounded like thunder. Dozens of eyes flicked between me, still seated near the back, and Victor, pale and rigid at the front. Elaine's hand trembled around her glass, the liquid inside rippling. The silence wasn't neutral, it was suffocating, heavy with judgment. Whispers began to bloom, sharp and cutting, carrying across the tables. Victor tried to speak, his voice cracking. It was all in good fun. She's too sensitive. You don't understand. But no one listened. They had seen too much from too many angles. I rose slowly, my chair scraping lightly against the floor. Heads turned, following me as I picked up my bag. Victor called after me, desperate now, his voice hollow. "Claire, sit down, don't walk out." But I did. I walked towards the doors, each step measured, deliberate. Behind me, the whispers thickened, the judgment sharpened. My mother didn't move, didn't call my name. Sloane lowered her phone, expression unreadable, as if already editing the chaos into her own narrative. No one followed me. No one stopped me. The doors opened to the cool night air, and as I stepped outside, the heavy silence of the hall gave way to the sound of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. Inside, Victor would keep shouting, trying to patch together the shreds of his reputation. But it didn't matter anymore, because for once the stage wasn't his, it was mine. The morning after the slideshow felt eerily quiet, as though the world itself had recoiled. I sat at my kitchen table, untouched coffee cooling in front of me, scrolling through my inbox. The subject line jumped out before I even read it. From Victor Hale. My hands trembled slightly as I clicked it open. The message was short, stripped of his usual grandiose language. "Claire, you have disgraced this family. You've chosen to humiliate us in front of everyone who matters. By doing so, you have made it clear you no longer wish to be part of this household. Consider this your decision, not mine. You've cut yourself off. Do not expect support from me again. To Victor." I stared at the words, numb. The irony hit almost immediately. After years of being told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too weak, suddenly I was powerful enough to sever myself from the family. He framed it as my choice, my betrayal, when in truth it was just his excuse to erase me once and for all. The rejection didn't shock me, not really. I had been rejected all my life in small cuts and deep gashes, each one dressed as a joke or lesson. But to see it written plainly, official and final, was like being handed an obituary for a relationship that never truly lived. As I closed the laptop, my phone buzzed. A message from Sloane. "You think that stunt made you look strong? All you did was make yourself pathetic. Everyone's laughing at you more than ever. Congrats, sis. You just burned down your own life." Her words stung, but not because they were true. They stung because they echoed Victor's voice perfectly. She had learned well, hadn't she? To sneer at me, to weaponize cruelty as casually as breathing. Minutes later, another notification, a voicemail from Elaine. Against my better judgment, I pressed play. Her tone was clipped, brittle. "Claire, I don't know what you thought you were accomplishing, but you've gone too far. You embarrassed your father, you embarrassed me, you embarrassed this entire family. We had friends, colleagues there, people whose opinions matter. Do you understand what you've done? You've made everything worse, for all of us. I just hope you're proud of yourself." I sank back in my chair, listening to the emptiness after her words ended. Not once had she asked how I felt. Not once had she acknowledged the years of humiliation. It wasn't about me. It never had been. It was about their image, their fragile facade. The phone lay heavy in my palm. One message from my father cutting me off, one from my sister mocking me, one from my mother blaming me. 3 voices harmonised in rejection. I checked the rest of my inbox, searching for something, anything, an ally, a defender. But there was nothing. No emails from cousins, no texts from aunts or uncles. The silence was louder than any insult. That was the twist, the cruelest revelation. It wasn't just Victor who had abandoned me. It was all of them. Every single relative who had laughed at the dinner table, everyone who had witnessed the montage, had now chosen silence. Not a word of comfort, not a whisper of solidarity. Their collective quiet confirmed what I had always suspected, that I had never been part of them. Not really. I was tolerated when convenient, discarded when necessary, and now erased when I dared to speak. I closed my laptop and pressed my palms into my eyes, forcing the sting of tears back. Crying felt useless. It wouldn't change the truth. But as hollow as I felt, a strange clarity settled in. The silence was devastating, yes, but it was also liberating. I no longer had to hope for their love, no longer had to twist myself into shapes to earn a place at their table. They had shown me decisively that I was not wanted. For the first time, I could stop trying. The apartment felt smaller once the messages sank in, like the walls had pulled closer, pressing against me with their indifference. I moved through the rooms in silence, pulling a suitcase from the closet. The zipper screeched as I opened it, the sound too loud in the stillness. I began to fold clothes, stacking them neatly though my hands shook. Each shirt, each pair of jeans felt like a fragment of the life I had tried to build under the shadow of a family that never wanted me. As I packed, my eyes landed on a battered shoebox tucked beneath the bed. Dust clung to its lid, the edges softened with age. Something compelled me to drag it out. Inside were scraps of my past, photos, old-school programs, a dried corsage from a dance I never enjoyed. Beneath it all lay an envelope, yellowed and brittle. My name was written across the front in Aunt Ruth's careful handwriting. I sat cross-legged on the floor, suitcase forgotten, and slipped the letter free. The paper crackled as I unfolded it. "Claire," it began, "I'm writing this because I don't know if anyone will ever tell you the truth. Victor never wanted you. When your mother married him, he made it clear you were not part of his plans. But appearances mattered to him. He agreed to keep you under his roof because you made Sloane shine brighter by comparison. His words, not mine. He called you a backdrop, a foil, a necessary shadow. I want you to know it was never about who you are. It was about who he wanted to appear to be. You deserve better than this family has given you. If the day comes when you realise it too, know that you are not alone." The words blurred as my eyes burned. I pressed the paper to my chest, the truth heavier than anything I had carried in years. So that was it. I had been kept, not loved, displayed, not cherished, a prop to elevate their golden child. My phone buzzed on the floor beside me. I wiped my eyes and glanced at the screen. A text message. Aunt Ruth. "I don't know what Victor said to you after the slideshow, but I want you to hear this from me. You are welcome here. My door is open. If you need a place to land, come stay with me. You don't have to do this alone." I stared at the words, stunned. The timing felt uncanny, as though she had known I was reading her old letter at that very moment. A sob broke loose from my throat, but this time it wasn't grief, it was relief. Twist of fate. In the ashes of abandonment, someone had reached for me. I typed back quickly, my fingers trembling. "Thank you. I'll come by tomorrow." Closing the shoebox, I returned to my packing with renewed purpose. This wasn't just about leaving an apartment. It was about leaving behind a role I had never chosen. Each folded shirt, each pair of shoes tucked away felt like a declaration. I am not their shadow anymore. When the suitcase was full, I zipped it closed and stood. The sound was final, like the click of a lock. I carried it to the door, pausing only to glance back at the small apartment I had once thought of as temporary. It had been a refuge, but never truly a home. Now, for the first time, I had the chance to step towards something that might be. I gripped the handle and pulled the suitcase behind me. The hallway, the United, stretched long and quiet, but instead of feeling like a tunnel of exile, it felt like a passage. Each step echoed with possibility. When I reached the street, the night air hit my face, crisp and cool. I inhaled deeply, the weight in my chest easing just enough to let me breathe again. A taxi passed, headlights sweeping across me, but I didn't hail it. I wanted to walk, to feel the ground beneath me, to carry myself into this new beginning. Behind me, my family's silence remained, a void I no longer had to fill. Ahead, Aunt Ruth's promise waited, a door that was open not because of appearances but because of care. I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle, lifted my chin and stepped forward. For once, I wasn't leaving in shame. I was leaving in choice. Aunt Ruth's house was small compared to Riverbridge Hall, but it breathed warmth in ways my parents' mansion never could. The walls were painted soft colours, lived in and unpretentious. the shelves cluttered with mismatched books and family photos that hadn't been staged by a professional photographer. On my first night there, Ruth made soup, and the simple act of eating with her in the kitchen, the two of us leaning over steaming bowls, felt more genuine than any banquet I had ever sat through. She didn't pry. She didn't ask for details about the slideshow or the fallout. She just set out a fresh blanket on the guest bed and told me, "You're safe here." And for the first time in weeks, I slept without waking to the echo of laughter in my head. The next morning, I pulled out a notebook and pen. I needed something tangible, something that could anchor me as I tried to make sense of the chaos. On the first page, I wrote a single heading: boundaries. The word looked stark, powerful, almost foreign to me. For so long, I had been trained to dissolve my boundaries, to fold them away so that my father could perform and my mother could pretend. Now I would build them, brick by brick. I made a list. I will not return to that house until there is a genuine apology. I will not engage with them unless they agree to therapy. Family therapy, real and guided, not another staged performance. I will not accept blame for their actions. I will not let silence convince me I am worthless. Each point steadied me, grounding me in a new reality. These weren't conditions to manipulate them into changing. They were promises to myself, vows that I would no longer crawl back simply because they demanded it. When Ruth peeked into the room later, I quickly closed the notebook, embarrassed by the rawness of the words, but she only smiled knowingly. "It helps to write things down," she said softly. "Keeps you from forgetting who you are when they try to tell you otherwise." Her understanding was a balm. By afternoon, I opened my laptop to check emails. I wasn't expecting anything beyond spam or bills, so the subject line startled me. From Martin Keane. My pulse spiked as I clicked it open. "Claire," the message began, "I know we've only met briefly at family gatherings, but I wanted to reach out after what I witnessed. You may feel alone right now, but you should know this. You did the right thing. You pulled the curtain back on a man I was preparing to partner with financially, and you saved me from tying my name to a hypocrite. You have more integrity in your silence than he has in all his speeches. I respect what you did. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I reread the lines 3 times, each word sinking in like sunlight through frost. Respect, integrity, words I had never heard directed at me within my family, not without a trace of sarcasm. Coming from Martin, they carried weight, proof that my actions had value beyond revenge. It was a small victory, but it mattered. In exposing Victor, I hadn't just freed myself. I had also stripped him of power he had wielded over others. I typed a short reply, hands steady. "Thank you, Mr. Keane. Your words mean more than you know. I only did what needed to be done." When I sent it, a quiet pride stirred in my chest. Not the brittle pride of survival, but something cleaner, sturdier. That night I sat with Ruth in the living room. She knitted while I read, the silence between us comfortable rather than suffocating. Occasionally she glanced at me, eyes kind, as if to remind me I wasn't invisible here. Before bed I opened my notebook again. Beneath my earlier list I added one more line. "I will build a life defined not by what they took from me, but by what I choose to keep." I underlined it twice, then closed the book with a finality that felt like the turning of a key. For the first time, I believed it might be possible. It was late evening when the knock came. Aunt Ruth had already gone to bed, leaving the house cloaked in quiet. I hesitated at the sound, dread pooling low in my stomach. When I opened the door, Elaine stood on the porch. Her coat was buttoned high, her lipstick faded, as though she had rushed here without her usual layers of perfection. "May I come in?" she asked, voice fragile, carrying none of the sharpness I remembered from her voicemail. I stepped aside silently, leading her into the living room. She didn't sit at first, only hovered by the window, eyes scanning the cosy space as though it were foreign territory. Finally, she lowered herself into an armchair, hands twisting the strap of her purse. For a long while we sat in silence. I waited. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. "Claire, I came because there are things I should have said a long time ago." I leaned forward, my heart tight with something dangerously close to hope. She kept her gaze on the floor. "Victor has always been cruel. To me too. In the early years before Sloane was born, I thought I could change him. But he broke me down. Little comments, little humiliations, threats about money, about leaving me with nothing. I learned to survive by keeping quiet, by siding with him instead of against him. It was the only way I thought I could keep our family intact. Her confession hung heavy in the room. "You were a child," she continued, her voice trembling, "and I should have protected you, but I was terrified and selfish. Staying silent was easier than fighting back." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. For the first time I heard her admit that she had abandoned me, that she had seen the cruelty and chosen not to intervene. "I wanted you to know," she whispered. "I wasn't blind, I just didn't have the strength." For a moment, something inside me cracked open. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that beneath the rehearsed smiles there was still a mother who cared, who regretted. My throat tightened as I asked, "And now, do you choose me now?" The question hung between us like a fragile bridge. Elaine finally looked up. Her eyes were glassy, but her answer was steady. "I can't. Victor is still my husband. My life is tied to his. I don't know how to exist outside of him." The words struck like a blade. Whatever flicker of hope I had allowed myself extinguished instantly. Even now, when the truth was undeniable, when the mask had cracked, she chose him. She still chose silence. She still chose survival over me. I leaned back, the air gone from my lungs. The tears that had threatened moments before dried into something colder. "You came here to confess, not to change," I said, my voice flat. Her face crumpled. "Claire?" "No." I stood, crossing to the table where my notebook lay. I wound it to the page I had written only days before, my list of boundaries. With deliberate calm, I read them aloud. "I will not return until there is a genuine apology. I will not engage without therapy. I will not accept blame for your actions. I will not let silence convince me I am worthless." I closed the notebook with a sharp snap. "Those are my terms, Mother. Until they're met, there is nothing left to say." Elaine's lips parted, but no words came. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time I saw her not as untouchable, but as small, diminished by years of choosing fear. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The night air spilled in, cool and cleansing. She rose slowly, clutching her purse as though it were armour. Her eyes searched mine for softness, but found none. Without another word, she stepped past me and into the dark. I shut the door firmly behind her, and I didn't look back. The new apartment was small, barely more than 2 rooms stacked together, but it felt like freedom. The walls were bare, the furniture mismatched from second-hand shops, and the kitchen barely fit a stove and a table for 2. Yet when I closed the door behind me, at night, silence wrapped around me, without judgment, without laughter, without performance. It was mine. I found work at a local library. It wasn't glamorous, but the smell of paper and ink grounded me in ways that boardrooms and banquets never had. Every morning I unlocked the doors, greeted regulars who came to borrow novels or ask for help on resumes, and shelved books with the patience of someone rebuilding her life, one spine at a time. The rhythm soothed me. Here no one asked me to smile for the camera or shrink into the background. I was simply Claire, and that was enough. Evenings were quiet. I learned to cook small meals, simple pasta, soup, roasted vegetables. Sometimes Aunt Ruth joined me, bringing dessert and filling the space with her gentle chatter. Other nights I ate alone, the clink of a fork against a plate the only sound. The simplicity felt foreign at first, but slowly it grew into peace. One Saturday, after a long day of shelving returns, I sat at my table with my laptop open. A folder on the desktop blinked at me. Personal archive. For weeks I had been gathering fragments, photos, voice notes, small clips from years that weren't defined by humiliation. There weren't many, but they existed. Me at 17, laughing with a friend during a school trip. A blurry video of me teaching myself to bake, flour dusting my face, a photo Ruth had snapped of me reading under a tree, sunlight catching in my hair. That night I decided to stitch them together, not as evidence, not as a weapon, but as a tribute to myself. I opened the editing software, familiar now from the nights I had pieced together Victor's downfall, and started dragging files into place. This time the cuts were gentle. A laugh led into a smile into a quiet landscape. each clip flowing into the next like a stream instead of a storm. At the centre, I placed a still image, me holding a book at the library, looking up mid-laugh. Not posed, not perfect, just real. I wrote across the frame in soft white letters, "This is who I am." When the montage finished, I dimmed the lights in my apartment, sat back and pressed play. The screen glowed, filling the room with pieces of myself I had almost forgotten. There was no cruelty, no mockery, no spotlight designed to burn. Only me, in moments of small joy, of quiet strength. I called it a night for myself. As the final clip faded to black, I exhaled a breath I didn't know I had been holding. My chest felt lighter, my shoulders looser. This wasn't about them anymore. It wasn't about proving anything or demanding recognition. It was about reclaiming my own narrative, choosing to see myself outside of their shadow. Just as I closed the laptop, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Claire, I just want you to know I saw the video at the hall. I didn't speak up then, but I should have. I'm sorry, I believe you." Another ping followed minutes later. "You didn't deserve any of it. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." My hands trembled. Names attached themselves to the numbers, cousins, distant relatives, people who had stayed silent in the hall, too afraid or too complicit to act. And yet now, in private, they were reaching out. Twist of the night. Not everyone had turned their back. Some had been watching, conflicted, perhaps cowardly, but not cruel. Their messages weren't redemption, but they were acknowledgement, proof that the silence hadn't been unanimous. For a moment, I let the screen glow against my face, reading the words again and again. A warmth spread through me, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but something gentler, a reminder that I wasn't utterly alone. I typed no replies, not yet, but I saved the messages. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled, not the brittle mask I had worn for years, but something real, something mine. Sunday morning light spilled through the blinds when my laptop chimed with a new email. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another library notice or an ad, but the sender's name froze me. Sloane Hale. My heart thudded as I clicked it open. "Claire," it read. "I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe because the house is unbearable now. Dad barely speaks. Mum walks around like a ghost. Everything feels poisoned. I'm leaving. I don't know where yet, but I can't stay here anymore. Maybe you were right. Maybe you always were." I sat back stunned. For so long, Sloane had been his golden child, his mirror, his loyal accomplice. She had smirked when he mocked me, basked in the light of his approval, while I withered in the shadows. And now she was breaking ranks. The twist struck hard. The sister who had been my rival, my tormentor, was beginning to see the cracks. Still, I read her words with caution. This wasn't an apology, it was a confession of exhaustion. She didn't say "I'm sorry." She didn't say "I see you now." But she had admitted something Victor never would, that the empire was crumbling, that perhaps I had been right all along. I closed the email without replying, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. I wasn't waiting for reconciliation. I wasn't holding my breath for a miracle where Sloane and I linked arms against him. That wasn't the point anymore. Forgiveness, I realised, wasn't about them. It wasn't about granting absolution to people who had never asked for it. Forgiveness was about loosening my own grip on the pain, setting it down so I could keep walking. It was about refusing to carry their weight any longer. That evening, I cooked myself dinner. Nothing elaborate, just a bowl of soup and a slice of bread, steam curling upward in the quiet kitchen. I set the table for one, lit a small candle more for comfort than celebration, and sat down. The silence was deep, but not the suffocating silence of my parents' house. This silence was mine. No eyes watching, no cameras flashing, no stage to endure. Only the scrape of my spoon against porcelain, the gentle clink echoing like a lullaby. I thought of all the nights I had sat at grand tables surrounded by relatives who laughed while I burned with shame. I thought of the montage that had shattered his performance, of the emails that had cut me loose, of the letter from Ruth that had given me a lifeline. And now this small, unremarkable moment of peace. I breathed in, slow and steady, and let the warmth of the soup fill me. This was the catharsis I hadn't known I was seeking. Not applause, not vindication. Just freedom. The freedom to exist without being the punchline, the shadow, the foil. I looked around the little apartment, walls bare but waiting, and felt something bloom in my chest. It wasn't joy exactly, not yet, but it was close. It was the seed of it. For once, I wasn't waiting for anyone to save me. I wasn't waiting for a seat at their table. I had built my own. And as the candle flickered, I raised my spoon, the sound of it tapping gently against the bowl, echoing in the quiet. No cameras, no laughter, no stage, only me, finally, irrevocably enough.